So, tonight we are continuing with this series, which is called Why I'm a Fool series. And I always say the reason why I call this series the Why I'm a Fool series is because if we know what the answer is and we don't do it, we're a fool. You know, a couple of days ago, I knew what the answer was to a particular thing in my own life, and I chose not to do the right thing, and I was a fool. It was foolish, and it only brought pain and discomfort until I listened to God, and I said, I know what I have to do, Lord. I know what the answer is. I just don't want to do it. And once I got right, and I did what God said I need to do, then everything turned around. So we can be very foolish when we know what the answer is, but we don't do it. So anyway, tonight, relationships, part 6, and this is going to be relationships in the family. Hey, Billy, how you doing? And remember, if you're just coming on right now and you're on YouTube, please hit that subscribe button. Don't forget the notification bell. If you click on the notification bell, then every time we put up a new video, a new clip, a new session, a new show, you will be notified. And if you like them, put the thumbs up. If you don't, put the thumbs down. But anyway, relationships and the family. So tonight, again, we continue with this study, which is by request. And the request was, you guys wanted to learn about relationships, relationship issues. And we are going to talk about many relationships. In the weeks to come, we're going to do one on marriage. We're going to do about relationships at work, with your neighbors, and with your enemies, and church, and all kinds of things. But tonight, as we move along, and we've done that, this is about, week 3, I guess, or 4 of relationships. Tonight, we're going to talk about relationships within the family. Now, when I say family, what I mean is parent-child, parent-child, child-parent, aunts and uncles, in-laws, ex-husbands, ex-wives, siblings, brothers and sisters, cousins, and everyone else, you know, Aunt Jean and Bob and all those other things. Everyone that's in your family mix. Even those uncles and aunts. I don't know about you guys. You tell me if you're true. I grew up in an Italian family, and it was always this thing that we had these aunts and uncles that weren't really our aunts and uncles. They were just really close to the family, and my mom and dad would say, oh, that's Uncle Steve. Okay, so he was always Uncle Steve, or Aunt, Susan. Even though they weren't really, but they were so close. Anybody have people like that in their lives, or it's just me? But anyway, Yolanda knows. You grow up in an Italian family, you got a lot of aunts and uncles. You don't even know. You can't even count them. There's so many of them. But anyway, we're going to deal with this. And you know what's interesting about family problems? Sometimes they are the hardest ones to deal with. I tell you, especially, people think I'm really bold with, sharing my faith, and I like to think that I am. I have a harder time sharing my faith with people in my family than people outside my family. It's a very strange thing, aunts and uncles and stuff like that. And also, I wanted to give a little disclaimer. When I say children, parents, I'm not talking about young children tonight. We're talking about grown children, okay? Grown children that we as parents have to deal with, and parents that we as grown adults have to deal with, because that's something we never planned on, right? Dealing with moms and dads as adults. So we're not going to talk about children. We'll do a special just on raising young children, some other time. But tonight, it's going to be all about adults in our families that we have problems with. And let's recap this whole thing about relationships. What does Marion have to say? We were never allowed to call anyone aunt or uncle except those who was. And I'm Italian, interesting. Well, it must have been my must have been the Polish side, because I'm half Polish and half Italian. But we had, there was always, whoever was in our life a lot, they got called by aunt and uncle. Anyway, over the last couple of weeks, we've been talking about why is it so hard to deal with people? Well, we've come to many conclusions. One is because we're trying to sell our side, our point of view, our opinion, and they're trying to sell theirs. And when we're both trying to sell that I'm right and you're wrong, well, it becomes a very selfish relationship. And that goes with our families too. And it explains why it's so hard to have interpersonal relationships with people. One day we're going to talk about relationships in the church. I tell you, next to family, boy, church relationships can get really hot and dicey. And just be a pastor of a small country church, boy, I can tell you some stories, and it gets brutal. Brutal. The people that we love so much and serve together can be our worst enemies. It just gets ugly, and it's so sad that it has to be that way. But anyway, we also learned the last couple of weeks, the reason why it is so hard to find good friends is because it's just hard to deal with people. And you know what? We have to come to this conclusion. If we can't get along with people in our own home, how can we get along with people outside the home? Right? If we don't have good dynamics in our families, if we weren't raised with healthy dialogue, which most families don't. Most families don't have a lot. There's a lot of yelling and screaming, and I know in my family, my Italian side of the family, there are some people who, one side was angry against another side for something that happened like 40 years ago. No one even remembers what the family dispute was, but this side of the family didn't talk to that side of the family forever. Aunts, great aunts and uncles, they had these gripes that went on to the grave. They would, I will never forget Uncle whatever. It's like, wow, what happened? I don't know, but they don't like each other. And you just accepted it. So, anyway, and if you guys agree with anything that I say, okay, give us the thumbs up. They should have a thumbs down thing too, if you don't agree. If you know anybody in your families that are like that. But we spoke about some scriptures that we can't forget each week. Romans 14:8, while we live to please the Lord, and when we die, we go to be with the Lord. So in life and in death, we belong to the Lord. Can't forget that. That's pivotal. Ephesians 5:9, for the fruit of the Spirit is in all goodness and righteousness and truth, proving what is acceptable unto the Lord. We live to do things that are pleasing unto Him, not pleasing unto us. And that's a problem, because if we're really honest, and you know, guys, how I feel about honesty, and I have to be honest with myself sometimes, and a couple of days ago I wasn't honest with myself, but I learned something from God, that I didn't care what God wanted in this one particular thing. I wanted what I wanted. And I wanted to stew in my anger. And you know what it brought me? Not peace. It brought me pain. Until God, made me cry uncle, no pun intended, and put that celestial arm behind my back and said, you gotta let that go, my son. Let it go. And I said, you know what? You're right. Okay? God has to be right. Let God be right and every man a liar. And we also learned, why do we have so much problems with family members and siblings growing up? I just had one sister, and we used to fight when we were little. I mean, we're close now, but when we were kids, she used to pick on me, my older sister, and I used to run to my mother and say, Laura's picking on me again. And she used to tease me all the time, and it was funny. But the reason why we have these problems is when we are so close to someone, and that's why family pains really hurt. They really do, okay? Trust me, in my counseling practice, with all the people that I've counseled over the years, so many of those pains come from within the family. What kids, grown kids, said to their parents, or about the grandkids, and just people really can get really ugly, and that's why it's well known that there's one call that the police hate to go to, and that's a family dispute. If there's a family dispute, they'll always bring 2 police officers there because they gotta. People punch each other out. You've seen it happen. People are screaming in the streets. Fathers and sons fighting, and it gets ugly. And why is that? Well, Psalm 41:9 says, "Yeah, my own familiar friend in whom I trusted, which did eat of my bread, has lifted up his heel against me." David knew about that pain. And it doesn't just happen with friends, it happens with family. So anyway, with all that aside, let's get to the nitty-gritty and let's honestly look at God's Word, because it's really pretty clear. Now, I'm going to read you some interesting scriptures that are going to surprise you. In Matthew chapter 10, verse 34, Jesus is talking, and he's speaking to his apostles, and he says, "Think not that I am come to send peace on earth. I come not to send peace, but a sword. For I am come to set a man at variance against his father, and the daughter against her mother, and the daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. And a man's foes shall be those of his own household." And Jesus says something very interesting here, people, that most people decipher incorrectly. In verse 37 of Matthew 10, he says, "He that loveth father or mother more than me is not worthy of me. And he that loveth son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me. And he that takes not his cross and follows after me is not worthy of me. He that finds his life shall lose it, and he that loses his life for my sake shall find it." Meaning, when Christ becomes a part of your life, there's going to be problems in your family. When you don't put God at the number one position, there's going to be problems in your family. And when Jesus says, if you don't love God more than anyone else, you're going to love God less. And what he wants for your family is going to be not as important. And what's going to happen? Family disputes. A house divided against itself, Jesus said, cannot stand. Your family will fall. Your family will fall. So, those are some hard things to hear. And I tell you one thing, once you become a Christian, okay, once you come to Christ, if you had family problems before, you're probably going to have more family problems, especially if no one else in the family comes to Christ. Because now we have this new issue. You're filled with the Holy Spirit of God, you're living for Christ, and those in your family who know not Christ, they're not. And boy, is there going to be issues, and that's what Jesus is talking about. Also, something else to consider. Matter of fact, this is the main thing to consider. The main thing. And I've been trying all my life. That's true, Charlene. Okay? A new divide. And yes, Fernando, yes, now he tells me that's true. People, even lately, with a little issue that I had with people, I forgot what I always tell you. And God has to remind me. And people, this is everything. If you don't understand this, and this even goes in our world today. Okay, problems in the world, they're not political. They're not social, economical. They're not any of those things. They're Ephesians 6:12, where it says, "For we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places." You know what that means? There's an old saying, you don't bring a knife to a gunfight. Meaning you can't settle problems within your family, within the world, within your nation, within your town, if you don't deal in the spiritual realm, because what we're really fighting is spiritual things. Everything is spiritual. And when we make it, no, it's nothing to do about spiritual. This is just about me and my brother or my aunt or my mother or my whatever. No, it's always spiritual. Meaning, there is a force, okay, like Star Wars, okay, the dark side, not the force, that is constantly trying to destroy you, destroy your family. You know, God, in His Word, He has established what we call in theology divine institutions. What are divine institutions? The institution of nations. God establishes that nations should be independently ruled. He has established the institution of family, the institution of marriage. And once those things are upset, everything crumbles. So you have to understand there is always a spiritual part of every issue that you have. You might say, oh, no, this is about money. No, it's always the enemy uses tangible things to work in the spiritual realm. You need to look at everything in the spiritual realm, because I always learn when I think it's about this and that, or I think it's about me, it really isn't about me. And like I've said before, we really lift ourselves up of too high of a level when we think the world revolves around us and our feelings. We like to think it's about us. It's not. It's about something bigger. Let's read in Luke chapter 12, Luke's take on what Jesus said in verse 51. Suppose ye that I have come to give peace on earth, I tell you no, but rather division. For from henceforth there shall be 5 in one house divided, 3 against 2, and 2 against 3. The father shall be divided against the son against the father, the mother against the daughter against the mother-in-law against the daughter-in-law, and the daughter-in-law against the mother-in-law. And people, we can see this in reality, and you know it happens. You know it happens, and I mean, what's the old joke? You know, everyone hates their in-laws, and it shouldn't be. I mean, I have to thank God I always had great in-laws, you know, and, you know, we always got along great. But there were times when we didn't have, you know, there was some issues. Because, you know what, with in-laws, there's letting go. You know, parents have to let go of their children onto someone else, and mothers have to let go of their sons to a wife, and fathers have to let go of their daughters to a husband. And we might not want to admit it, okay? But boy, it's there. We might like to think, no, I'm bigger than that. I am so happy for my son. I'm so happy for my daughter. I don't want to get involved in their life. Let them be. But when someone we love is getting hurt by someone else, we want to get involved. We don't want to let go of that position that we had. And boy, a mother steps, when she steps in between her son and her daughter-in-law, going to be big fireworks, okay? And any other way you want to mix that up. So we got to take these facts into our heads and think about them. Oh, I know what I want to do tonight. I want to take a poll, and I want you guys to give me A, B, C, or D. In your families out there, what do you struggle with the most? A is going to be husband, wife, ex-husband, ex-wife. That's A. Grown children, that's B. Relatives, which are aunts, uncles, cousins, nieces, nephews. And D is siblings. What have you struggled with the most? I'm just curious. We might have a smorgasbord of different answers. I'm just curious. Husband-wife relationships, ex-husband, ex-wife, A. Okay, grown children. I see Fernando put down B, grown children. C, relatives in general, and D, siblings. Marion says husband, wife, husband, ex-wife, ex-husband. Okay, I'm just wondering, you know what, if we've never been divorced, we wouldn't have problems with ex-wives, but we can have problems with our wives and husbands. I mean, it's pretty clear that most marriages are not in good shape. Most marriages do have issues. Okay, we have an A and a B, grown children, husband, wife, exes, and stuff like that. Okay, so we can see a trend. And what does God say about these things? What does he say? Well, in Isaiah 54:13, a great unusual scripture that most people don't know about. It says, "And all your children shall be taught of the Lord, and great shall be the peace of thy children. In righteousness shalt thou be established. Thou shalt be far from oppression, for thou shalt not fear, and from terror, for it shall not come near thee." Notice the prophet Isaiah says, "In righteousness you shall be established." And teaching our children about God is going to bring peace to our children. And what that all means is, what's the foundation of your family? If family, now how many people say, well, to us family is everything? Well, we have to be careful, because if family is everything, God can't be anything. Okay, it needs to be God is everything, family is second to that. Okay, now I love, a great Italian families, and I come from that, and good family is a great thing, but if that family isn't based upon something that's going to handle situations properly, that's going to deal with issues properly, there's going to be problems. In Ephesians 6:1-3, speaking about young children, "Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor your father and mother," which is the first commandment with promise. Interesting thing. You know what? Ephesians 6:1-3 says something really interesting. It talks about children and about obeying their parents, and children honoring their mother and father. And they're not the same thing. And Paul brings up one of the commandments, honor your father and mother, which is the first commandment with promise. What does it mean with promise? Promise of what? Well, verse 3, that it may be well with thee, and that you mayest live long on the earth. Wow. You will live out your life to its full extent when you honor your mother and father. And if honoring mother and father are not there, then there's going to be a shortness of life. You don't get the promise. Also something else, and I said I wasn't going to talk about young children, but I will for a second here. And this is a big issue, okay? I want to knock this out of the park right now. Okay? When your children are young and they're living at home, they are to obey their parents in the Lord, for this is right, Ephesians 6:1. They are to obey what you tell them to do. But until when? Does it stay for the rest of their lives? No, it doesn't. Because once they leave the home and become adults, do you know that your children and you as a grown adult, you do not have to obey your mother and father anymore. You know what changes? Once you become an adult, you go to the law of you then honor your father and mother. Well, what's the difference between obeying your parents and honoring them? Big difference. As a child, by obeying them, you are honoring them. As an adult, you are honoring your parents by respecting them, but you no longer have to obey them. What does that mean? When you are on your own and you're an adult, legally an adult, whether you're single or not, mom and dad can give you advice, and you should say, thanks a lot, mom and dad, for that, but you don't have to obey it. You just have to give them honor and respect them for who they are. Yet when they're children at home, they have to obey mother and father. That proves that they are honoring their mother and father. So something to think about, because many times I have people come to me and they're dealing with grown children, married children, and they say, no, my son and my daughter, they're not listening to me. They don't have to. You can't tell them what to do anymore. And they are perfectly in their right to not listen to you. Okay? They are perfectly in their right. They have no obligation scripturally to obey you. But they have to treat you with respect. And again, what does that mean? Dad, thank you for that advice. I appreciate it. I'll talk about it with my wife. Thank you so much. But they do not have to obey you. And what we have to do is, when our children listen to us and they give us lip service, but they do what they don't want to do anyway, we have to let that go. We can't take it personal. The father can't be mad at his daughter-in-law because his son is not listening to what he told his son to do about the daughter-in-law. No, you can't do that. You have no biblical grounds at all. Yes?
They don't have to obey because they're accountable to God now.
Yes,
right?
Good call, Sally. They don't have to obey anymore, because who are they to obey? God. And you know what's interesting? You know what the whole family situation is all about? Think about this, okay? Because what does God want us to call him? Father. How does he treat us? Like a parent. And what are we to respond as children? Do you know, if you train your children as they're young to obey mom and dad, they will have, and honor mom and dad, when they grow up, they'll have no problem obeying and honoring God. You see, raising your children is preparation for them to be turned over to God, the ultimate parent. And if we never have that relationship in our families, don't think your kids are ever going to have that relationship with God. Not that it's never going to happen, because God does the supernatural, but it's going to be hard, because if they can't submit to you when they were little, they're not going to submit to God. God is preparing us. That's our responsibility as parents, to prepare them to submit to God, their Father. But if they never honored us or respected us or followed the house rules, what makes us think they're going to bow the knee to Jesus Christ? So that's a big responsibility. And it's transference. Transferring my honor and respect for mom and dad now over to God the Father. Important things here, you know. And I know it sounds like depressing. Well, does that mean that, you know, my kids are lost? No. God is always working. He's always, you know, we make mistakes. He's always turning things around. But it makes it a lot harder. And you look at our young people today who are very disrespectful. You know, when I grew up, stuff that our kids are doing, I mean, these kids, the stuff that I did when I was growing up would never fly in our homes, because we had strict parents, you know, and you just didn't mess around with that. And you might have hated it, but you know what? We grew up to be better people because we had stricter parents. In Ephesians 6, verse 4, Paul says, "Fathers, provoke not your children to wrath, but bring them up in the nurture and admonition of the Lord." What does that mean? Okay? Well, us dads, we have these problems. You know what? When we poke our children, and we poke them, and we poke them, and we get under their skin, there's a point where you're not raising your children, you're mentally abusing your children, because they don't submit, and then you lose your temper, and then you pound your kids with anger and words and foolish talking, and they're not going to respond, and you provoke your children to wrath. Verse 6 says, "Not with eye service as men pleasers, but as the servants of Christ, doing the will of God from the heart." We're supposed to raise our kids, okay, from the heart. And we're supposed to honor our mothers and fathers from the heart. Not just saying, "Yes, Mom, yes, Dad," but really wanting to do it, okay? Because, did you ever think about this? You know what? There are times that we want to obey God because we know it's good. And there are times that we obey God because we have to, but we don't want to. We hate it. Isn't it better? The greatest sign of love is obeying someone because you trust them. And if they say something, then it must be good for you. And when we think about God, God isn't there just to make our life, not at all. He's not there to make our life miserable. Everything He's done is that our joy may be full. And if we're angry that He says no about things, then we don't understand His love for us. He says no because it's a good reason. And as parents, we say no to our kids. It should be for a good reason. Okay? Colossians 3:20, children, obey your parents in the Lord in all things, for this is well-pleasing to the Lord. Fathers, provoke not your children to anger, lest they be discouraged. Okay, we see that same thread going through. In Leviticus, going way back in the Old Testament law, Jewish law, Leviticus 19:3, it says, ye shall fear every man his mother and his father, and keep my Sabbaths. I am the Lord your God. See how God is preparing us? And always that word fear doesn't mean to be afraid of, but to have respect for. When we have respect for our parents, we will have respect for God. And the list goes on and on. But where do we start? Okay, I can tell you all these things and we could go, yeah, that's awesome, this is great. We see what we got to do, but where do we begin? How do we fix problems in our relationships with families? Well, you know where it starts, okay? And I hate to beat a dead horse, people. It starts with truth. And not just the truth about them, the truth about us. And if I spoke to one parent, I spoke to 100, okay, who are hurt by their grown children. And they'll always come back to, yeah, you know what, but they hurt me. They really hurt me. People, because someone hurt you doesn't give you the right to hurt them back. Doesn't give us the right to hate them. Doesn't give us the right to torture them or to give them the cold shoulder. Isn't it interesting how silly we can become, how childlike we can become, myself included, to get angry and then to give people the cold shoulder and shun people, and I'll show them. I'm not going to talk to them. I'm going to make them beg to want to be back with me again. Do you realize how childish that is? What did Jesus say on the cross? Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. Okay? We've got to stop holding grudges. In 1 Peter 4:17, a really, really important scripture. 1 Peter 4:17. This is one that we don't like. For the time has come that judgment must begin at the house of God. Where's the house of God? Okay, the temple of God. Who's the temple of God? We are. When you come to Christ, Christ dwells in you. Peter says, for the time has come that judgment must begin at the house of God. And if it first begin at us, what shall the end be of them that obey not the gospel of God? You know what that means? Before we deal with a grown child, a husband, a wife, an ex-husband, an ex-wife, an aunt or uncle, whatever it may be, what does God say over and over again? Before you judge them, before you deal with them, deal with you. Because we have a way of looking at our past through rose-colored glasses. And say, I don't know why my kids treat me the way they do now. I don't know why they shun me the way they do. I was a great father. I was just wonderful. And we can truly make ourselves believe that we were perfect parents. People, there is no perfect parent but God. Somehow, some way, you did something wrong. And we have to start with us. So what's the list in deciphering problems in family relationships, it begins with getting rid of pride. Pride, pride, pride. Okay? Those three words, pride, 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 okay? They do more damage to humanity, to family, to marriages, to relationships with children, to churches, to governments, to everything. It begins with you not having to be right. You don't, but we always feel that we have to be right. And if I have to be right, then you have to be wrong. We never ever consider that maybe I was wrong. And just recently I had to consider that I was wrong about something. And I didn't want to listen, even though it was right in front of my face. And it wasn't until I admitted that I was wrong that I understood and did what was right. Yes, and not teaching them, thank you, Fernando, the true meaning of unconditional love. You know what? We want unconditional love, okay? But do we give unconditional love? Well, what does that mean? Okay? Means no conditions. Means I love you no matter what you do. Means I love you even though you hate me. I love you even though you disappointed me. I love you even though you sided with the ex, okay? Boy, people, you want to add another dynamic because so many people are divorced. When I grew up as a kid, I didn't know anyone who was divorced. That's how old I am. Now, I don't know anyone, who's not divorced. I mean, for the most part. And what happens with that? Well, we have dad who's gets a new wife, and mom gets a new husband, and the kids are in the middle. And what happens? Okay, one tries to buy off the other, and who's going to look better to the kids? And it becomes a buying match. Because what do we want? We want the kids to like us because we feel so guilty of what we did to them by getting a divorce, and somehow we figure if we buy their love that we can excuse our mistakes. It's an old tale. It's a sad tale. Also, in dealing with family and friends, especially family, it begins with no malice. That word is very important. Malice. It means to say something with bad intentions. Can you say something good with bad intentions? Very easily. If you place something in someone's ear because you know it's going to tick them off, and you do it anyway, you know how wonderful. You know what a mature person is to look at a situation, see someone going through something, and you have a juicy detail, and you say, you know what? If I said that to them right now, it might be the truth. It's just going to make them get really sad. They don't need to know that right now. They're having a good time. I don't need to do that. But how many times I'm going to tell them that. That'll get them really upset. We have little barbs on our hooks. Okay, have you ever saw a fishing hook? Do you know why a fishing hook isn't just a regular hook? Because it has a hook with a barb on the end, okay? So when it hooks, it doesn't come back out. Malice is to purposely know that if I tell that person, hey, I saw your kid playing the other day down there with that other kid down there, you know it was going to make them unhappy. You had daggers. When we tell our kids or family members something because you want to cause pain. Okay? She says, I have hope. That's funny. Yeah. You know how hard it is to keep quiet? What does God say? We're supposed to listen twice as much as we speak. Right? That's why God gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth. Is it hard to keep quiet? Man, I went through a season not too long ago where I could not keep my mouth shut because I was so angry and hurt that I wanted everyone to feel my hurt. And like I told you guys before, we look around for people who are going to back up our pain and go, yeah, yeah. Interesting thing was, because I have a lot of good, mature people in my life, Christian people, it was interesting. Everywhere I looked, no one gave me compassion. They said, you're wrong. And you did the wrong thing. And I had to think about it. And I had to say, you know what, Lord, thank you for people who tell me the truth when I need to hear the truth. Thank you for people who stay quiet. Thank you for people who speak when they need to speak. What does the Bible say in Ecclesiastes? There's a time to speak, and there's a time to keep quiet. Time to live, time to die. There is a right time to bring a truth out, and there's a wrong time to bring a truth out. You know, running out of time here. We're going to have to continue this next week. But I'll give you an example of a good time and a bad time to bring something up. You know, let's say you're at a funeral, you know, and someone comes up to you. Let's say come up to me as a pastor and go, hey, what do you think about Bob, man? You think he's in hell? You know, or, you know, do you know what he did? You know what? That's not a good time to discuss that. That's not a good time to bring that up. And that's none of my business. And that's none of anyone else's business. Okay? When someone's going through a really hard time and they just got a bad diagnosis from a doctor, you don't go, hey, you know what? God says all things work together for good. So you should be happy. Not a good time to use that scripture. Isn't that interesting? There are good times and bad times to use certain scriptures. The scripture can be true. Is it true that all things work together for good to those who love the Lord and are called according to his purpose? Yeah, that's true. Is there a time when you shouldn't say something? Yeah. Is there a time when you should? Yeah. Takes discernment. Takes discernment. So, we're running out of time here, but we're going to get back to the points here. The self-check points. Okay? And how to deal with these relationship issues. And how to deal with the family issues. How to deal with our children, our grown children. How to deal with ex-wives. I mean, that's a hard thing. I don't have that, so I don't know much about that, other than from counseling. I've had to deal with it personally, but I can see how painful it is. I often think about that for people who have been divorced, and I think it must be really hard to have your ex-spouse come over and pick up the kids with their new lover, and to say, gee, my wife is now sleeping with that man. I think about that and I go, wow, I've never had to deal with that. That has to be hard. And we both have to be able to deal with it properly, because there is a way to do that. And I think for those who are divorced, maybe we should do a special just on being divorced. And how do we deal with that? Because that's hard. Someone that you once were deeply in love with is now in love with someone else. Man, that hurts on many levels, right? So maybe we will continue, certainly with this thought, and maybe we will delve into that divorce situation, because that really adds, it really dovetails into a lot of things. Divorces cause frictions with the new marriages, the old marriages, the kids, other kids from the other marriages that come in, and it becomes this, cornucopia of confusion. And boy, trying to work things out, and Christmases and holidays, and I mean, how do you look at people someone who stole the one you love? And it's hard, but it doesn't mean it's not impossible, okay? Anyway, guys, show went really quickly, super, super fast. Probably the fastest show I can remember. I hear our music playing. I thank all you guys for paying attention and the input that you got. And we're going to have to definitely revisit this next week. And let's get back into this and take notes and think about questions that you want to ask about this, because there's a lot to talk about. We might stay in this point for a while to really just squeeze that washcloth until there's no more virtue left. Let's wring that washcloth until we get everything out we need to get out. Thank you so much. God bless you all. Lord willing, we'll see you next week.